Ethan couldn't shake Sophie's words from his mind as his driver took him back to the office. The way she looked at him, without judgment or pity, had unsettled something deep within him. He didn't understand why she cared or why her concern felt so different from the calculated sympathy he was used to from others. When he returned to Blackwell Enterprises, Sophie was already at her desk, typing away as if she hadn't just cracked a piece of his armor. "Evans," he said, his voice sharper than he intended. She glanced up, her calm demeanor unshaken. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell. Come into my office." Sophie stood and followed him, her steps measured but confident. Once inside, Ethan shut the door and leaned against his desk, arms crossed. He studied her for a moment, as though trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally he spoke. "You were out of line." Sophie raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Out of line for caring about my boss. For showing up uninvited." He clarified, though his tone lacked its usual bite. "I wasn't trying to pry," she said, meeting his gaze. "But it was obvious you were struggling and I wasn't going to ignore that." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I don't talk about my personal life to anyone." "I figured," Sophie replied, a hint of warmth in her voice. "But maybe that's the problem." Her words hung in the air, heavy but not unwelcome. Ethan's jaw tightened as he fought the urge to retreat back into his shell. Yet there was something about Sophie's presence that made it impossible to shut her out completely. "Lily," he said at last, his voice quieter. "My sister. She's sick. Has been for years." Sophie's expression softened, and she took a tentative step closer. "I'm sorry, Ethan. That must be incredibly hard for you." "She's the only family I have left," he continued, surprising himself with his own candor. "I've done everything I can, doctors, specialists, experimental treatments, but nothing seems to work. And no matter how much I try to control the situation, it's like..." He stopped, his throat tightening. "Like it's slipping through your fingers," Sophie finished gently. Ethan nodded, his eyes clouded with frustration and pain. "I hate feeling powerless." "You're not powerless," Sophie said. "You're doing everything you can, and that matters. But maybe it's time to let someone share the weight." Ethan shook his head, his defenses rising again. "I can't afford to let people in. Trust is a liability, always has been." "Not always," Sophie countered. "Sometimes, it's a lifeline." Ethan looked at her, his expression unreadable. There was something in her eyes, a quiet strength that challenged and comforted him all at once. For the first time in years, he felt the urge to believe that someone might genuinely care without expecting anything in return. "Why are you so persistent?" he asked, his tone laced with curiosity. Sophie smiled softly. "Because I see someone worth helping, even if he doesn't see it himself." Ethan's chest tightened at her words, the sincerity in her voice cutting through his walls like a blade. He didn't know what to say, so he said nothing, allowing the silence to speak for him. Over the next few weeks, something shifted between them. Their conversations grew less adversarial and more personal, though Ethan still kept most of his guard up. Sophie didn't push, but she was always there, a steady presence that he found himself relying on more than he cared to admit. One evening, as they worked late in his office, Ethan glanced at Sophie. She was focused on her laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Why did you take this job?" he asked suddenly. Sophie looked up, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask?" "You're overqualified," he said. "And you're not the type to tolerate someone like me unless you had a reason." Sophie leaned back in her chair, a thoughtful expression on her face. "I took this job because I wanted a challenge. And because I needed a fresh start." "A fresh start?" Ethan prompted, his curiosity piqued. "I lost someone close to me last year," she admitted, her voice quiet. "It made me realize how short life is. I needed to do something different, to prove to myself that I could move forward. Ethan studied her, his expression softening. I'm sorry. That must have been hard. It was. Sophie said, her eyes meeting his. But it also taught me that we can't go through life shutting people out. We need each other, even if it's just to remind us that we're not alone. Ethan swallowed hard. Her words striking a chord he wasn't ready to acknowledge. He nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. Maybe you're right, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Sophie smiled, the warmth in her eyes lighting something in him he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't trust, at least, not yet. But it was a start. Ethan sat at the head of the massive conference table, the city's skyline stretching out behind him. The board meeting was in full swing, but for once his attention wavered. Sophie was seated in the corner of the room, her laptop open as she took detailed minutes. Every so often, he caught himself glancing at her, drawn by her calm focus amidst the chaos of corporate politics. Her presence had become a steadying force in his life, and though he didn't want to admit it, he found himself relying on her more and more. She wasn't just efficient, she was intuitive, often anticipating his needs before he could articulate them. And beyond that, she challenged him, pushed him to see things differently, and refused to let him hide behind his walls. Mr. Blackwell? One of the board members prompted, snapping Ethan back to the present. Yes, he said briskly, refocusing. We'll move forward with the proposed strategy. Ensure the marketing team has everything they need. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and as the board members filed out, Ethan turned to Sophie. Join me in my office. She nodded, gathering her things and following him down the hallway. Once inside, Ethan closed the door and leaned against his desk, a habit Sophie had noticed when he was deep in thought. You've been quiet today, he said, studying her. Sophie blinked, surprised by his observation. I didn't think you hired me to talk during board meetings. Ethan smirked faintly, the rare expression softening his usually sharp features. Fair point, but you're usually not this reserved. Sophie tilted her head, her lips twitching in a small smile. Are you saying you missed my commentary? Ethan chuckled, the sound low and unfamiliar. Don't let it go to your head, Evans. Sophie set her laptop on his desk, crossing her arms. Actually, I was just thinking about you. Ethan's eyebrows lifted slightly, intrigued. Should I be worried? She shook her head, her expression serious now. I've noticed you've been different lately. Less guarded, it suits you. Ethan stiffened slightly, though her words warmed something inside him. Don't read too much into it, he said gruffly. I'm not. Sophie said gently. I just think it's good to let people in sometimes. It doesn't mean you're weak, Ethan. It means you're human. The way she said his name sent a shiver down his spine, and for a moment, he found himself at a loss for words. No one had ever spoken to him like this, honest, direct, and without fear of his reaction. Why are you so persistent about this? He asked, his voice softer now. Because I know what it's like to shut people out, Sophie said. Her eyes soft but steady. And I know how lonely it can get. Her words hung in the air, and for once, Ethan didn't try to brush them off. He let them settle, let himself feel the weight of them. I've been alone for a long time, he admitted finally, his voice barely above a whisper. It's easier that way. Or at least, it used to be. Sophie stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. It doesn't have to be, Ethan, not anymore. The vulnerability in her voice, the sincerity in her eyes, broke through something inside him. For the first time, he felt a flicker of hope, a small, fragile thing, but there nonetheless. Thank you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For being here. For not giving up on me. Sophie smiled, her heart aching at the rawness in his tone. I'm not going anywhere. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened in ways neither of them had expected. Ethan began sharing more about his life, about Lily, about the pressures of running a billion-dollar empire, about the loneliness that came with it all. In return, Sophie opened up about her own struggles, the loss of her fiancé in a car accident, the guilt and grief that had driven her to seek a fresh start. Their late-night conversations in his office became a lifeline for both of them, a place where they could be vulnerable without fear of judgment. One evening, as they worked late again, Ethan leaned back in his chair and glanced at Sophie, who was perched on the couch with a stack of files. "You've made my life infinitely more complicated, you know," he said, a teasing lilt in his voice. Sophie looked up, feigning innocence. "Me? Complicated? Never." Ethan shook his head, a genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I'm serious. You've changed things. And I don't know whether to thank you or fire you." "Why not both?" Sophie quipped, grinning. Ethan laughed, the sound rare and genuine. "You're impossible, Evans. And yet you keep me around," she shot back, her eyes sparkling. Ethan's expression softened, and for a moment, he simply looked at her, the weight of his emotions clear in his gaze. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I do." Sophie's breath caught, the unspoken meaning in his words making her heart race. She didn't know what this was between them, but she knew one thing for certain: it was real. And it was just a beginning. Ethan Blackwell had always been the master of keeping his personal life separate from his professional one. But as weeks turned into months, Sophie Evans became the exception to every rule he'd ever made. It started with small moments, their late-night conversations over takeout in his office, her ability to diffuse his temper with a well-timed quip, the way she challenged his ideas without fear. Sophie had become more than a secretary, she was his confidant, his partner in navigating the chaos of his world. And it scared him. One evening, as the office emptied out, Sophie was at her desk organizing files when Ethan emerged from his office. His tie was loose, and he held 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Still here?" he asked, setting one cup in front of her. Sophie smiled. "Someone has to make sure you don't drown in paperwork." Ethan leaned against her desk, sipping his coffee. "I could handle it." "I'm sure you could," Sophie said, her tone teasing. "But it wouldn't be nearly as efficient without me." Ethan chuckled, the sound low and warm. "Fair point." The moment lingered, the air between them charged with an unspoken tension. Ethan's gaze dropped to Sophie's hand as it rested on the desk, and he had to resist the urge to reach out, to close the distance between them. Sophie broke the silence, her voice soft. "Ethan, you've been different lately, in a good way." He raised an eyebrow. "Different? How?" "You're softer," she said, her cheeks tinged with a faint blush. "More open, and it's nice to see." Ethan's throat tightened. No one had ever described him as soft before, but coming from Sophie, it didn't feel like a criticism. It felt like an acknowledgement of the walls he was slowly letting down. "Maybe that's your fault," he said, his voice low. Sophie's eyes widened slightly, but before she could respond, the office intercom buzzed. The interruption came in the form of Damien Cross, Ethan's biggest competitor in the business world. Known for his ruthless tactics and relentless ambition, Damien had been circling Blackwell Enterprises for months, looking for a way to undercut Ethan's dominance. "Damien," Ethan said, his tone cold as ice, when the man strode into his office uninvited. "Ethan," Damien replied smoothly, his sharp smile not reaching his eyes. "I thought it was time we had a little chat." Ethan's jaw tightened, and Sophie, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, quietly stepped out of the room. But she stayed close, her instincts telling her that this was no ordinary visit. The meeting with Damien lasted over an hour. And when Ethan finally emerged, his expression was stormy. Sophie didn't need to ask to know that whatever had been discussed hadn't gone in Ethan's favor. "What happened?" she asked softly as he passed her desk. Ethan hesitated, his shoulders tense. "Damien has been buying out key suppliers. He's trying to cripple one of our divisions." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "Can he do that?" He already has, Ethan admitted, his voice low with frustration. But it's more than that. He made it personal. He knows about Lily. Sophie's breath caught. How? I don't know, Ethan said, his fists clenching. But he's using it to get under my skin and it's working. Sophie stood, placing a hand on his arm. Ethan will figure this out. Don't let him get into you. Her touch grounded him and he exhaled slowly, some of the tension leaving his body. You're right, he said. But this isn't just business anymore, it's war. Over the next few days, the lines between personal and professional blurred even further. Ethan started working longer hours, driven by a determination to outmaneuver Damien's schemes. Sophie stayed by his side, not because it was her job, but because she couldn't bear to see him carry the burden alone. One night, as they worked late again, Ethan looked up from his desk to find Sophie asleep on the couch, a stack of files in her lap. The sight made something in his chest ache, a feeling he couldn't quite name. He stood and gently removed the files from her hands, draping his suit jacket over her. For a moment, he simply watched her, the quiet vulnerability of her sleeping face making his defenses crumble even further. You're dangerous, he murmured, more to himself than to her. And I don't know what to do about it. The next morning, Sophie woke to find Ethan already at his desk, his sleeves rolled up and a cup of coffee waiting for her on the side table. She smiled softly, touched by the small gesture. As the days went on, their partnership grew stronger, their connection deeper. But the challenge posed by Damien loomed over them like a storm cloud, threatening to test not only Ethan's resilience but also the fragile bond they were building. And for the first time, Ethan realized that letting Sophie in had given him something to lose. Ethan leaned over the conference table, his sleeves rolled up, and the tension in his jaw evident. The room was scattered with reports, emails, and notes, all pieces of the puzzle Damien had orchestrated to bring Blackwell Enterprises to its knees. Sophie sat across from him, her laptop open and her brow furrowed in concentration. 4 hours, they had been working together, combing through data, brainstorming strategies, and trying to find a way to counter Damien's underhanded tactics. I don't understand how he got access to some of these suppliers, Sophie said, her voice tinged with frustration. There must be a leak. Ethan nodded, his expression grim. I've thought the same thing. Someone inside Blackwell is feeding him information. We need to find out who. Sophie's mind raced. What about the contracts with the remaining suppliers? Can we renegotiate to lock them in before Damien approaches them? Ethan considered her suggestion, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. That's a solid idea. I'll have the legal team prioritize it first thing in the morning. What about tonight? Sophie asked, looking up from her screen. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Tonight? Sophie smiled faintly. We could draft a few proposals ourselves. Get ahead of it. Ethan's lips quirked upward, the faintest hint of a smile. You're relentless, Evans. I learned from the best. She teased, holding his gaze. For a moment, the tension in the room shifted. Ethan's sharp edges softened as he looked at her, the intensity in his eyes more personal than professional. Sophie felt her pulse quicken under his gaze but quickly turned her attention back to the laptop, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through her chest. By midnight, they had sketched out preliminary agreements and identified key suppliers who might be swayed to stay loyal to Blackwell Enterprises. Sophie leaned back in her chair, stretching her arms above her head. I think we've earned a break, she said, glancing at Ethan. Ethan leaned back as well, running a hand through his hair. You're right. You hungry? Sophie blinked. You're offering food? Who are you, and what have you done with Ethan Blackwell? Ethan chuckled, the sound deep and genuine. Don't get used to it. He ordered pizza, much to Sophie's amusement, and the two of them sat on the couch in his office, plates balanced on their laps. The atmosphere was lighter. The weight of the day momentarily forgotten. You know, Sophie said between bites, I used to think billionaires like you didn't eat things like pizza. Ethan smirked. I'm full of surprises. Sophie laughed, the sound soft and infectious. "I'll say." Ethan studied her for a moment, his smile fading into something more contemplative. "You're different, Sophie. You don't treat me like everyone else does." Sophie paused, setting her plate down. "That's because you don't need someone to worship you, Ethan. You need someone to remind you that you're human." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut, and he felt the walls he'd spent years building start to crack even further. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that," he admitted quietly. Sophie's gaze softened, and for a moment, the world outside of that office seemed to fade away. "You're not as alone as you think you are, Ethan. You just have to let people in." The next morning, armed with their late-night strategies, Ethan and Sophie called a meeting with the key department heads. Together, they outlined a plan to secure their suppliers and tighten internal controls to identify the leak. Ethan was his usual commanding self, but there was a new energy to him, a fire that hadn't been there before. Sophie noticed it in the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. As the meeting ended, Ethan caught Sophie's eye and gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a silent acknowledgement of her role in the plan, and it made her heart swell. Later that evening, Sophie found herself once again in Ethan's office. This time reviewing emails from potential suppliers. Ethan stood by the window, his silhouette outlined against the city lights. "You've been quiet," Sophie said, glancing up from her screen. Ethan turned, his expression unreadable. "Just thinking about," he hesitated, then crossed the room and sat beside her on the couch. "About how much things have changed since you started working here." Sophie tilted her head, studying him. "Good changes or bad?" "Good," he said, his voice low. "But complicated." Sophie's breath hitched, the weight of his words settling over her. "Complicated, how?" Ethan leaned closer, his gaze locking onto hers. "You make me question things, Sophie. The way I run my company, the way I live my life, the way I see us." The air between them grew charged, and Sophie's heart raced as she searched his eyes. "Ethan, I'm not good at this," he admitted, his voice rough. "But I know one thing, I don't want to lose you." Sophie's pulse quickened, her defenses crumbling under the raw honesty in his voice. "You're not going to lose me," she said softly. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the unspoken tension between them finally breaking free. Then, as if drawn together by an invisible force, Ethan closed the distance, capturing her lips in a kiss that was both tentative and intense. Sophie responded without hesitation, her hands gripping his shirt as the weight of the past months melted away. In that moment, all the barriers, fears, and doubts faded, leaving only the undeniable connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "This changes everything," Sophie smiled, her heart full. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." The atmosphere in Ethan's office the next morning was thick with unspoken words. Sophie sat at her desk, pretending to focus on emails, while Ethan remained in his office, the door slightly ajar. Their kiss from the night before lingered in both their minds, a moment that had shifted the fragile equilibrium they had built. For Sophie, it was a tangle of emotions. Excitement, fear, and the undeniable pull toward a man she knew could break her heart. For Ethan, it was confusion mixed with a vulnerability he wasn't used to. By mid-morning, Sophie couldn't take the silence any longer. She knocked on Ethan's door and peeked inside. "Got a minute?" Ethan looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. "Of course. Come in." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "We need to talk about last night." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady but guarded. "I know, I don't regret it," Sophie said quickly, her cheeks flushing. "But we need to figure out how to move forward. This can't affect our work." Ethan nodded slowly. "You're right. But pretending it didn't happen isn't an option either." Sophie swallowed, her heart racing. "So, what do we do?" Ethan stood, crossing the room until he was standing in front of her. We take it one step at a time. I don't know where this is going, Sophie, but I know I don't want to lose you. Personally or professionally, her breath caught at the sincerity in his voice. I don't want to lose you either, Ethan. But we need to be careful. The last thing we need is for people in the office to start talking. Ethan smirked faintly. You're worried about gossip? I'm serious, Sophie said, crossing her arms. This could complicate things. Everything about us is already complicated, Ethan said, his tone softening. But I'm willing to figure it out if you are. Sophie hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Okay, one step at a time. Their agreement was immediately put to the test that afternoon when Damien struck again. Sophie burst into Ethan's office, her tablet in hand. You need to see this, she said, her voice tense. Ethan frowned as she handed him the device, which displayed a news article. The headline read, Damien Cross secures major deal with Blackwell's top client. Ethan's jaw tightened as he read the article. He's moving faster than I expected. That's not all, Sophie said, her voice grim. I just got a call from one of our senior managers. Damien's team has been reaching out to our employees trying to poach them. Ethan slammed the tablet onto his desk. He's trying to dismantle us piece by piece. We need to respond, Sophie said, her tone firm. But not recklessly. He wants you to react emotionally to make a mistake. Ethan looked at her, the fire in his eyes meeting her steady resolve. What do you suggest? Sophie took a deep breath. We play the long game. Focus on strengthening our internal team, renegotiating contracts, and showing our clients and employees why they should stay loyal. And she hesitated. And Ethan prompted. We need to find the leak, Sophie said. Until we do, we're fighting blind. Ethan nodded, his respect for her growing with every word. You're right. Let's call an emergency meeting. Over the next few days, Ethan and Sophie worked side by side, their connection evident but unspoken. They were careful to maintain professionalism in the office, though every shared glance and accidental touch carried an undercurrent of the intimacy they were trying to navigate. Late one night, as they finalized a presentation for a key client, Ethan glanced at Sophie, who was sitting on the floor surrounded by papers. You amaze me, he said suddenly, his voice breaking the comfortable silence. Sophie looked up, startled. What? Ethan set his laptop aside and leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The way you handle pressure, the way you think. You're not just my secretary, Sophie. You're my partner. Her heart skipped a beat at his words, and for a moment, she forgot about the chaos surrounding them. I don't know what to say to that, she admitted softly. Just say you'll stick with me, Ethan said, his tone uncharacteristically vulnerable. Sophie smiled, her eyes shining. I'm not going anywhere. Their fragile bubble was burst the next morning when a package arrived at Ethan's office. It was an envelope containing copies of confidential emails between Ethan and one of his suppliers. This is bad, Sophie said, scanning the documents. If Damien has these, it means he's one step ahead of us. Ethan's expression darkened. The source is closer than we thought. Sophie met his gaze, determination burning in her eyes. Then we find them. And we stop them. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't feel like he was fighting alone.